Hello and welcome to Mississippi Insight. I'm Byron Brown. Thank you for joining us. Mississippi's winter storm response is our focus this week. We've had almost a week of bitter cold, freezing rains and dangerous ice, and now residents and businesses are cleaning up after one of the worst waves of cold weather in living memory. Major streets and highways locked in ice are finally thawing out. But there are lingering issues with water supplies. Many communities have had to organize water giveaways after the cold caused problems for public water systems. Impacted communities include the city of Jackson, Vicksburg, Natchez, Crystal Springs, and many others across our viewing area. Our first guest this week is new to his job, but he's no stranger to disaster. Stephen McCraney is a retired lieutenant colonel of the Mississippi National Guard. He has worked in emergency response in such disasters as Katrina, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, the Mississippi River flooding in 2011. He joins us now in his new capacity as executive director of the Mississippi Emergency Management Agency. Colonel McCraney, welcome to Mississippi Insight.
Hey, great to be here, Byron.
Well, Governor Tate Reeves appointed you to replace Director Greg Michelle in late January, and you're already responding to a benchmark weather crisis. What is your current assessment of where Mississippi stands after 5 days of brutally cold and dangerous weather?
Yeah, this is one of those events that we don't necessarily see very often in Mississippi. You know, we're definitely a tornado state, a hurricane state, and we prepare for all types of disasters. We even have a plan to respond to an earthquake if necessary. So you pull out those manuals. You have all your plans for a cold event. And this one has gone rather long. It's the freezing every night. The hard freezes have been just wreaked havoc on the pipes in the city of Jackson, local areas, and all over the state.
What tips can you offer people at this point who may be going without heat or water or other essentials in this crisis?
You know, you've got to be prepared. You've got about 38 counties right now that have loss of power of numerous numbers inside those counties, and those emergency management directors are definitely on the front line. They're out there. They're opening up warming centers. Call your local emergency management director. The shelters that we have normally for other types of disasters, tornadoes and others, we open those shelters back up, and those are out there. Some of them are feeding meals and where you can get water, etc. So always look to your local emergency management director in all 82 counties in the Band of Choctaw Indians. They do a fabulous job of being ready out there on the front line. From the second level is MEMA. We stand back here, we look at all the requests that they might enter into our system, the web EOC, and that's where they can request extra supplies, whether it be generator support or law enforcement, and that way we can track those things and make sure that we get them the items that we need.
What is your current assessment of where Mississippi stands after all this 5 days of cold?
Yeah, we've got, of course, North Mississippi has been greatly impacted, as well as Central Mississippi. We've been able to even actually work and continue our vaccination mission along with the Mississippi National Guard and the Department of Health in South Mississippi because we were able to get the freezing temperatures out. We were able to thaw the roads. We were able to get those facilities back up. That has not been the case in Central Mississippi and in North. We have taken some of our regular day-to-day crews and we've shifted them. I've got the South working, then the Mid. We're sitting here ready to respond if necessary, but you have to look at life safety. The first responders have been very heavy, working very hard out there, including our linemen. Those with all the power companies and EPAs are out there doing a fabulous job. This morning we started out with about 188,000 that were out of power. I think the last, I looked at it a few minutes ago, we restored about 36,000 of that, and they continue to do yeoman's work out there to get electricity turned back on for every Mississippian that they can in a time. I can tell you that stay away from power lines. You have trees that are falling on the lines. Please don't go out sightseeing. Let those linemen, let those first responders get out there and operate where they need to be.
We'll have more with MEMA Executive Director Stephen McCraney with Mississippi Insight continues. How concerned are you about power demand across the state and providers' capacity to supply that demand?
Well, that's a expertise that don't have that depth with, but I even look at my own house that I thought I was well prepared, and it turned out that I had a pipe that wasn't as well covered as I thought it should be, and I actually had a leak last night. We experienced very little power outages in the area I was in, although about three miles down the road they did, and it was a pine tree that fell and came over it. So the system gets taxing. That the freezing rain causes so much more weight on the lines, and then you have one limb that falls, and that's the straw that broke the back, so to speak. And they're responding as quickly and as safely as they can to get that back up on the grid.
We don't want to belittle our friends in Texas who are having such huge challenges restoring power, water, and other basic services, but do we have anything to learn from Texas's bad experience here in Mississippi?
I think if you look at basic preparedness, we've with all of our other disasters, we really look at the first 72 hours is on the individual. So in doing that, you have to look at an ice storm of this nature is extended on out about 5 to 7 days. So that is not normal Mississippi. We get snow, we get ice, we go outside, you see everybody playing and moving around in it for one day, and then it is gone. As this event has definitely extended out further, I don't think that we had as much stockage for food, water, and other personal items that we might need. And the simple thing of an emergency kit in your car. I don't think people in Mississippi really put a couple of blankets in there or an extra coat, so to speak. Keeping those items, the batteries charged up for your cell phones, etc. After about 24 hours, you're out of battery power. So you need to look at that, and we need to reflect on it, and we look at those plans and get better for any type of future event like this.
Do you consider this a once-in-a-lifetime event, or is this something that we need to prepare for the near future?
I think if you prepare for worst case scenario, when I was getting trained years ago with the National Guard, with the civil support team, it was an all hazard response. So you don't necessarily tailor what you're doing at home and how you're preparing just for one specific event. Look at it for a prolonged event. What if power did go out for 2 to 3 days? In the summertime, we can definitely survive that a lot better. In the wintertime, no. The elderly families that are around you, your neighbors, checking on them, ensuring that they have what they need as well. You need to look at the long-term event and what you might experience, and do you really have enough of the things that you need in an emergency situation that you use every day? Compound that times 5 or 7, and that I don't think that we're at that level with this disaster. I think we're getting into our 6th and 7th day in the North Mississippi, so this is definitely an extended event that could definitely drain water, food, and those essential items, medication that people might need.
Yeah, we've had 18-wheelers and interstates shut down that were stuck on the highways for long periods of time. Do we need to invest more in snow equipment going forward, or is this something that, or do you feel that we're adequately supplied in that category?
I know that MDOT prepares for events like this, and it's tricky. You look at what we were projected to get here in central Mississippi was supposed to be a rain event, not in snow, not necessarily the ice event that we had. Once ice gets on those roadways, that's a game changer. You're really at Mother Nature's whim at that point. She's going to deal you a card that you maybe weren't expecting, and I think those are, as I was talking with other officials today, 1 to 2 degrees really makes a huge difference on whether or not we can snowplow, whether or not we can push that rain and sleet off a roadway versus a frozen precipitation.
Looking ahead, any concerns going into the spring about potential heavy rains and flooding as we saw in the last couple of years in the South Delta or beyond?
Well, you look at any kind of heavy snow event, and I've been watching it go all the way across the United States, and I'm looking at everything above me, the Tennessee Valley, everything above me that's snow, ice, and water up there. It's coming down the Mississippi River. So we'll be looking at that. We've already started looking at some of the projections, and getting ready for those flooding events that will come our way, because the water is going to come down the Mississippi River and our other tributaries, Columbus and other areas. So we're getting prepared for that. As this thaw comes out, that water is coming down through the state of Mississippi, and we've got to be prepared for that as well.
Cole McCraney, thank you for joining us and with Mississippi Insight.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
All right, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. Power was an issue that many of us thought a lot about this week as freezing rains and ice brought down power lines and caused outages across the state. By Friday afternoon, as we record this, outages across the state had fallen below the 100,000 mark. Earlier in the week, utilities were urging customers to conserve energy however possible. They warned that a surge in power demand could outstrip the power generation in Mississippi and potentially force rolling blackouts. Commissioner Brent Bailey joins us now by Zoom to talk about how our power grid held up during these winter storms. He serves the Central District of the Public Service Commission, which monitors and regulates state utilities. Commissioner Bailey, welcome to Mississippi Insight.
Thank you, Mr. Byron. Good to see you.
How would you rate our power situation through this week of brutal cold and ice, and how did our grid perform overall?
So through the last two winter storm events back to back, we've heard a lot of words. We've heard historic, we've heard unprecedented, debilitating, a lot of adjectives to describe the events of the last 6 or 7 days. And I don't think any of them are too extreme. This was a very severe event, and we did have impacts felt all across the state. Thankfully, our power grid as a whole was very resilient throughout this process. Sure, we've seen a lot of damage to the distribution side of things out in rural areas, but even within the urban areas. But for the most part, the health of our generation and transmission delivery platform and infrastructure remained solid.
How concerned were you and your commission colleagues about the potential for rolling blackouts to cope with energy demand?
Well, that was certainly on Tuesday night. Sort of a surprise to us, particularly here in Mississippi. We were well aware of the events that were going on in Texas, watching that, understanding some of the impacts that we're having in Louisiana as well. We knew from talking with our utility partners that we were actually generating more than we were consuming here in the state, but because of the nature of the independent system operator and the connections that exist throughout the MISO South region, we were being called upon to help share in the load shedding aspect, as well as providing additional generation to our neighboring states. So that did have an impact that caused, for a small amount of time, some rolling blackouts here in the state. I still don't have a good number of what that looked like as far as the number of residential customers that were impacted. We hope to have the information very quick, but it was a short-lived level 5 max gen alert event, thank goodness, and we have not repeated it this week or really come close to doing that, despite other appeals to the public to conserve, reduce use, and be aware of their overall energy consumption patterns.
Well, the state of Texas, we were talking about, is one place that saw millions of outages. Texas itself is a huge energy producer, but its regulators badly underestimated the state's winter energy demands ahead of this weather. So how did we, as an energy importing state, avoid this sort of crisis?
Well, the state of Texas and what they call ERCOT is a really a very unique outfit here in the U.S. They're very confined within the state. They're not interconnected to other grids in the U.S. They depend heavily on their own generation fleet and portfolio. And there was just a unique set of circumstances that all came together that just caused massive disruption from the generation, the extreme cold, spiked energy demand to historic highs that normally is not even seen during the dog days of summer. And by the norms of what's experienced, all those factors were greatly exceeded. which began to create disruptions, blackouts, and failures across the system. And we saw through those extreme temperatures that even trickled into the Mid-South region from Texas, Louisiana, into Arkansas and Mississippi. As we can see, today as this is being recorded, the remnants of those extreme weather events outside our windows. Again, we didn't quite get the lows that they saw over in Texas, but at the same time, I think our folks saw what was happening, got ready, got prepared, and were able to create a resilient system that, while no doubt we did have outages across the state, it was not the result of lack of generation resources.
What do you think the takeaway from all this is going to be when this is all said and done, that we've earned here and possibly from Texas? What are we going to take away from the experience from this winter storm?
Well, as we know, the event's not over with. There's still, as you mentioned, significant outages. There was well over 200,000 outages all at one time here in the state of Mississippi. That continues to be whittled down significantly by the hours. Reports come in. We're seeing great progress in restoration of services, of electrical services to the state. And you also got to keep in mind, not just was electricity at risk, but in certain parts, as we've seen in Texas and others, natural gas supplies, as the demand for generation and demand for residential heating, industrial, manufacturing, all those were pulling against each other, and precedent and priorities had to be assigned. Thankfully, we didn't have any really low pressure natural gas events here in the state of Mississippi. Everybody who wanted gas got gas, but it did require some prioritization where that goes to ensure residents could have the gas needed to heat their homes. And not just electricity and natural gas, but we're also beginning and seeing the impacts this storm has on our water systems, our water infrastructure, and what that means for being able to operate your home, your business, governmental facilities, et cetera. And then we're seeing that play out in many towns and communities across the state. So our takeaway is, I think we're going to have an opportunity to step back, learn a little more. Again, a lot of things we mentioned, unprecedented, historic. Are we going to be ready for the next one? I think we will be, but there's certainly going to be an opportunity for the utilities, for us as regulators, as well as the entire all parts of the energy and natural resource delivery value chain to take a look and make sure that we all have our ducks in a row, that no one sector is the weak link in the system. And so I think as the Public Service Commission, we'll have this opportunity over the next couple weeks to really reevaluate what the process was, what the situation, the impacts, and what we can do down the road better to ensure a more stable system.
It appears that we're seeing in the weather patterns, we're seeing more changes of the weather patterns, that were extreme weather on both spectrums, whether it's severe weather in the summertime or whether it's severe cold weather in the wintertime. Do we need to be more prepared for all extreme types of weather now?
I would say yes, to a certain extent. We can build systems, we can gold plate them, we can, gold standard those things, but doing that takes money. And that's where you got to really weigh out the economics, those costs for which benefits at what time of the year. And are consumers prepared to support that outlay of resources to ensure that our systems will perform perfectly in any and all extreme weather events? And that's something that the PSC, working with our utility partners, with input from stakeholders, consumers, large utility users, that we'll continue to work on really on a daily basis through our oversight of the utilities to ensure that consumers' dollars are being put to the best use to ensure a reliable, affordable, sustainable system.
Let's step back and look at the national picture. The new administration, the Biden administration in Washington, is pressing for new clean and renewable energy initiatives. How do you think such programs might impact Mississippi?
So utilization of alternative energy, renewables, et cetera, I see a great opportunity in the state to further diversify our energy resources. We are, by all accounts, a natural gas heavy state. While we do have other resources, we do have some coal generation, some nuclear generation. Those are really, natural gas is still the primary fuel resource here in the state. So it never hurts to have added diversity in that energy portfolio, regardless of the fuel source, whether it's a non-fuel or renewable source. I think there's a lot of opportunity here in the state as we see consumer preferences change. You see a lot of corporate sustainability requirements and goals and objectives that are going to be looking for that renewable resource to add into their corporate governance position on sustainable manufacturing, et cetera. And that's going to drive some of that as well, drive those investments for that here in the state. We have a lot of resources here. We have a lot of sunshine. We actually have some limited resources, a lot of biomass and bioenergy resources. We have the opportunity for different scales of hydro generation. Even though we virtually have none in the state now. So those are things we can look at when we're looking at long-term integrated resource planning opportunities, something that's very new to the state of Mississippi and that we'll be getting into throughout 2021 with our regulated utilities, is looking at that 10, 15, 20-year utility generation, utility resource planning horizon, and the role that renewable energy resources can play into that to create better value, extreme good value for consumers, for those ratepayers going forward. And we think there's tremendous opportunity for that.
All right, Commissioner Brent Bailey with the PSC, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, Mr. Byron.
All right, and we'll be right back. Big thanks to Lieutenant Colonel Stephen McCraney from MEMA and Brent Bailey from the Public Service Commission for joining us this week. We'll be back next weekend with more of the political and current affairs coverage that you demand. I'm Byron Brown. From all of us here at 12 News, make it a great weekend.